Let's
let's
get to
get
the
into
Josh
it.
Kroenke press conference. Did this at noon yesterday. It was interesting because, as we talked about at the top of the show, the David Adelman hiring was the first item on the agenda, which makes sense, right? You want to get questions about the most important news item on your agenda there if you're Josh Kroenke. But I think he also, I forget if he said this, but it was like, oh, I saw that it's hard to, yeah, he mentioned it's hard to keep this stuff internal once it happens. And Shams broke the story. I didn't see the Shams post before Josh said it. So I was just like having my morning tea and listening to his presser. And he's like, and so we'll be moving forward with David Adelman as head coach. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's it then. Um, he gave us 28 minutes of his time in this presser, and we're going to be dissecting his words for at least the next hour or so. This is probably like the 20th podcast, radio show, whatever you're listening to that is dissecting Josh Kroenke's words. But that's what happens when you're the part of ownership and the governor of this basketball team. So Adelman gets announced as the next head coach, and he's not there. We haven't heard anything about whether there's going to be an introductory press conference for David Adelman yet.
Do you need one if you're already been in the organization?
Well, if he's going to do things differently, I'd like to ask him about like what is it that he's going to do,
Well,
right?
he'll be up on
It's
a
not
press
like
conference
we're
at some
new
point.
to him, but it's like, okay, tell us your plan.
Yeah.
Right? I was listening to I think it was on Altitude Radio. Troy Rank from the Denver Post was talking about the media room during this press conference, and there were some people that was like, where is he, like, are we gonna get to talk to the new head coach of this franchise that was just announced or what? Said he gets a pass because he was asked some questions after game 7 and whatever. All due respect, I disagree with that heavily. It was actually something that even though I thought Adelman was going to be the pick at some point this summer, I figured we'd get to hear from him more because he was actually asked some questions after the Nuggets got eliminated in OKC, but a lot of them he was like, I'm not focused on that right now.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't
We're
have the
gonna
job yet. What's he
so it's
supposed
like,
to
okay, we
say?
don't have well, yeah, he doesn't have the job yet. We didn't actually get any information. I think Josh said like, okay, we give everybody a break at the end of the season and like whatever. So maybe he'll be back. I hope we get one. I assume we're gonna get one at some point. We'll
It
get
may
more
not be
specifics
till
on.
like training camp though.
I hope it's not that long, right? Because maybe it's going to depend on like filling out his staff and like all this stuff. But, I hate to compare us to the Lakers, but, they hired JJ Redick, and I don't think it was like immediately, but he did get to have like a whole really long, actually, introductory presser with like an extensive Q&A session. And I would
But
like our media to get to ask that because I think it's fair to say that one of the immediate sort of mass reactions to this is that it's a quote, nothing will fundamentally change, to quote Joe Biden, type hire because it's internal. But Josh alluded to give him a full training camp, give him an opportunity to implement his system and whatever that's going to be different from Malone's. Good point. D's Nugs. Maybe we'll get a joint new coach, new GM presser.
and Jake Coyne's here. Thanks for
Oh my gosh,
joining
hi Jake.
in.
Yeah, that's to put together the look of unity. The last time that we got one of those was at the end of season presser last year when we got I think it was the three of Josh, Malone, and Booth together. And then on media day, Malone and Booth were separate. Separate segments of the media session. So perhaps that was for what's the word? Well, in English, what do you do? Foretelling? Foreshadowing. This season.
Foreshadowing.
Thank you. Okay.
Well, also really quick,
Yeah.
We got a comment earlier saying from Free Game Hans that you've been cooking on Twitter in reaction to all the coaching and front office news. So as we're going into that in your reactions, because you weren't necessarily happy with the order of these announcements,
The order of operations, yeah.
let's continue on and get into some of this.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of my so-called cooking. I don't know if the food is good, but all right. First question, Will, real or fake? David Adelman was the right hire for head coach.
I say real still. I liked, like I said at the beginning of the show, you know, I thought his postseason run was fairly impressive for this circumstance.
Yeah.
And I still think there's questions about him, and he'll have to like get his coaching staff together and get his philosophy together, bring the ideas that he wants to bring to the organization, maybe get a new defensive type of coordinator coach and fill that out. But it's hard to know exactly with no GM what the direction of the team is besides us reading what Josh's comments are right now. But I wonder, even if we hired a GM, how high up the list of candidates would had David Adelman been if they hired a GM first? Because I think he was a good candidate for other teams around the league too. Like, especially after what he just did in the postseason, someone was going to take a swing on him. I think if they were,
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the openings are already being filled with interim coaches. So it was like the trend of the league, I guess.
It was, as we discussed on this show with Matt Brooks, on the episode where we did our OKC season or series preview, rather. We talked about all these assistants, getting promoted, and it goes back even before this season, right? One that I didn't even mention, I think, on that show was the Wizards going with Brian Keefe to replace Wes Unseld Jr. After they went through their coaching search as well. I think Adelman would have been fairly high on the list. Now, look, I do not want the Nuggets to model themselves after this organization, but what the Sacramento Kings did, I'm just going to say what they did. Sacramento Kings did was fire their GM immediately after the Kings got eliminated from the play-in. Immediately. Within 12 hours, announced the hiring of Scott Perry as the new GM. Bye-bye, Monty. Hello, Scott. And then he went through his own process. Personally, my read on that situation is that it was more of a formality and that Scott was probably going to go with Doug Christie, who the Kings liked, who had been interim head coach after taking over for Mike Brown, because the Kings liked him so much. The players talked about liking him too. It was kind of a similar situation to here, but the Kings gave Scott Perry the, at least like publicly, like who knows like how much pressure like ownership was applying to be like, we want this guy, so hopefully you pick this guy, but we're gonna let you like do your search and whatever, and then hopefully you just pick this guy anyway. So I don't know how much behind the scenes pressure was being applied. So I can't say that was like a real process. Again, might have just been formalities, but at least publicly, okay, Scott Perry comes in, he gets to decide if Doug Christie continues, and then he did pick him. So when you ask the question of how far up would Adelman have been on a list, I don't know, but it could have ended up something like that.
Especially if you know the players' thoughts on it and you're the GM, you'll
Right.
want to start off like doing something that the players may not be on board with, though. Not that you should necessarily make that stop you.
Sure, but you should consider it. I think a good GM thinks about all of these different factors, including how the players feel, right?
Mm-hmm. So would you say it was a good choice?
In terms of the right hire, I've been very consistent on this, that David Adelman, I probably felt this way even before the playoffs, that David Adelman is better than like 95% of the candidates that would be considered. Just because I think David Adelman is probably good. And I think there's lots of coaches that can come in and mess things up and not have that pre-existing relationship with the players. So then that, not necessarily would be bad, because obviously a new head coach could come in and like establish those things, but there's a risk, inherent there. And there are lots of coaches that might be considered that I absolutely don't want anywhere near my organization as
Yeah.
well. So, in terms of like, was he the correct hire? I think there are probably only 3 coaches that you could argue would be better candidates than him that would be available. Argue, but I think he's like maybe on that level or close to it as these guys. Some of the names that I was kind of that I've been bouncing around with my various peoples was like, oh, I was very impressed with the Clippers defense in round 1, and maybe Jeff Van Gundy could come in and like revitalize that for us.
Hell no.
And I don't know how he would be as a head coach, but that was just like something that was going through my mind as I was like, I'm really impressed with like the versatility and like what he did to transform that team, really, right? Because it's less like what the Clippers did, but how much better they looked, since he came in and like started to implement these really aggressive schemes.
I'd take him
That's
as the
one.
defensive coach, not the head coach.
Well, sure,
yeah.
but like he's
But
too
we're
big
not
of
gonna
a
get him.
name. Like if
No.
he's gonna leave LA, it's gonna be for a head coaching position. He's not
Yeah.
gonna go be a defensive coordinator
But
somewhere
I
else.
still think something along these lines could happen, where it's like we're bringing a new defensive-minded assistant coach to get this defense into shape. But that could be big wishful thinking, of course. But that's something I'm hoping for.
Sure. Another name that has been tossed around that I'm like, okay, I could see it with this guy too is Micah Nori, who we know Jokic loves, because he's been a Nuggets assistant before. Um, I don't know anything about what kind of offense he would coach or anything like that. So this is why it's like, okay, it's questionable whether these guys are actually better than Adelman. Um, and then I actually can't remember the other name that I was thinking about. But all these guys are assistant coaches. Like there are no like former head coaches that are really like super piquing my curiosity. I'm pretty low on Frank Vogel, but to be fair, he did make that sad Phoenix Suns team a top 12 defense last year somehow, like magically.
Yeah, so you
And
think he could get the defense together? His offenses
sure.
usually suck, but could Jokic just
Yeah.
take care of that and then boom? But I don't know. I'd rather just
Like
go
he's
for
probably a really good regular season coach.
yeah. I'd rather just go
At minimum.
for Adelman and like he's like a younger guy. Seems to be pretty smart with how he understands the game on offense specifically, and I like that. It's just a matter of fixing the roster and stuff.
Yeah.
And the GM. So
Now, before we move on, I do want to just get into what Josh said about him. So just kind of giving you insight into what Josh and like the organization likes about Adelman. He liked that he knew the players well, and he talked specifically about, yeah, he knows their tendencies and stuff, but I like how he knew him as people. So I think that Josh was kind of inclined to be like, if Adelman does a good job, like I want to hire him. Like he was sounds like he had the inside track there. Personally, for me, I like that the players like him and seem to respect him, at least for now, right? I'm sure they respected Malone at some point in the distant past. I will say the 82 game grind is just different. And I'm curious to see how that's going to play out next season with Adelman at as head coach, because yeah, the players were clearly more motivated after the coaching change. I don't think that was necessarily just Adelman there or even just Malone out. It's just like, oh, this is a big change. Like we said, it was the signal like we're not going to sleepwalk through the rest of the season. It's time to get it together, and everyone kind of whipped themselves into shape, started playing defense, started watching film, and started to take their jobs seriously. Christian started playing defense. Apparently able to guard SGA better than Jaden McDaniels can. Even on the worst nights, because I'm like, man, SGA is just getting whatever he wants in this Wolves series. It's something to behold. Josh said that he was impressed with Adelman's style of communication. So he does mention what we've talked about on this show and what a lot of people have talked about, where he's like a little more like collaborative with the players, or even like letting the players kind of take more ownership over aspects of conversations with each other. But the other thing that Josh mentioned that really stood out to me was just because of how Josh's demeanor was as he talked about it, is how much he appreciated how Adelman dealt with the media. he was very impressed with that. You could tell by like the whole tone of his voice changed when he talked about Adelman's ability to deal with the media. And I think that's interesting because you have Josh is a relatively young billionaire, right? I think these guys get, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. I appreciate this about Adelman too. I like how candid he is and all that. But I feel like Josh is not easily impressed sounds bad, but I think that he perhaps values the ability to make things sound good a lot. And it's not that I don't think that Josh was contrasting this to Malone. I think that he was contrasting it to I don't know how this guy's going to handle this situation in such a pressure cooker kind of scenario where again you're taking over this job with 3 games left in the regular season and then you're thrown into the playoffs with a team that has the best player in the world and all of that. I think he was impressed relative to the expectation of how Adelman would handle that being literally like thrown into this situation. So that stood out to me because of his tone. I know you listened to the presser after the fact. Did that stand out to you as well?
I think I mean, it didn't stand out as much as you're describing, but I mean, it's definitely true. I just am like, I don't necessarily care about a coach that's not great with the media. I mean, that's cool. I mean, Malone also was amazing with the media. But I was more interested in how he talked about his communication with the team for sure. Like that's what I care
Yeah.
about more. But I mean, it is such like a Josh Kroenke thing to like promote within and give the guy who's already been there the chance and the GMs who've already been there the chance. And that's like kind of what the issues that we're worried about are. But I do think Adelman's like the right guy to continue that with. But it is like such a funny trend of like, and also it's a funny comparison thinking about how he communicates and makes something sound good versus how Calvin did. Not
Oh,
they're different roles, but
that's exactly what I was thinking just now. I was like, I find it interesting how impressed Josh was with Adelman's ability to communicate. Like, it's not that so Calvin could communicate, and he wasn't confusing. He said things in no uncertain terms, right? So maybe that's like part of it is he likes that style of communication. But Adelman isn't nearly as acerbic isn't even the right word. Calvin was just a little tactless at times. Like to that point, I don't think Adelman is quite that, although we have a very limited sample size to be fair. But I think yeah, the contrast there is interesting, and I kind of wonder what Josh thought of Calvin's various media availabilities at times, to be honest. But on your note about how he talks to the players, there was something that Josh specifically said about appreciating how Adelman was able to challenge guys while also encouraging them, like that kind of stuff. This is like basic coaching stuff. So that one didn't like stand out to me as much because it was like, okay, this is what coaches do.
yeah, but I
Like,
do
I'm
think that's
challenging my
going to
guys,
be
but blah blah blah.
important because I do think some are worried about whether Adelman's too much of the comfort
Mm.
zone for the players and if players are going to be too complacent with him. And he is going
Mm-hmm.
to have to be a little more like a hard ass at times to motivate a Jamal to be in shape or whatever and not. And I think that's what maybe some players are mad about. I mean, I heard rumors, I don't know how true it is, but like giving players certain preferential treatment, not holding people accountable seemed to be a problem with the team this last season. And Adelman is going to have to like walk that line. And he does seem more like a calm, like chill personality, which I think is good on the whole. But he is going to have to like knuckle down and like get the guys to do what they're supposed to be doing at the same time, if necessary. But I do think these guys are like veterans and can do it on their own. It's just, you know,
Yeah, but like they were also part of the problem last year. Like they were the problem
yeah.
last year. When we're talking about the players on the team, like not taking things seriously and like all of this stuff. So I do think that there is a risk of when you have somebody that is super calm and chill, they can sort of leave a power vacuum open for not necessarily nefarious elements, but it's kind of like everybody remembers being a teenager. Your parents give you a little bit of rope, and then you take as much as you possibly can. You push the boundaries as much as you can. And I kind of think that's what I think that's what the players will do because that's human nature, right? Like, oh, okay, let's see like how far can I actually push this guy until we find out like what the boundaries actually are. Um it's funny that Malone had this reputation for being like a hard ass like all the time always, because also part of the problem was that he was too soft on certain players apparently. Adelman sort of creating um a more, I don't know, egalitarian culture. He did
Yeah, could
say
be.
when I think it was at his first either pregame or postgame presser that like nobody's gonna get special treatment except 15. Like he's like,
Yeah,
no, like
that's how
Jokic
it
can do
should be.
whatever he wants. I wonder like who was complaining about. There was those articles that were coming out of meetings about Jamal and Jokic getting special treatment, and I'm like, were people mad that
At
Jokic took a few
Jokic.
games off when he wanted to be there for the birth of his child
Yeah.
or something? I know like Russ visiting family in LA throughout the season was like an issue, but I'm like, I don't know, dude, he's 37. I don't really care, but I guess it rubbed some players wrong. Like, um, and we know like Jamal was going to UFC fights and what there was a lot of vacationing happening throughout this season for people. Not necessarily a vacation for Jokic, I shouldn't say it like that, but maybe the opposite of a vacation for Jokic, if we're being honest. Okay, Josh didn't want to overthink it. He's like, I want Adelman. We're gonna go with him. He wanted to give DA the full summer to assemble his staff. We're gonna talk about the timing of this hire. But it gave the current assistants that are on the staff the opportunity to make other plans if they are not going to be retained. So they can, make DA can make those decisions about who he wants to keep and who's going to be let go earlier so that they can make other plans. I think that's completely fair, right? We're going to talk about the order of operation stuff on like coach versus GM, but I think these were reasonable reasons to want to get this done first. I just kind of wish they'd spent the last 7 weeks looking for a GM, but I get it. The other thing here, and this is probably the most important thing that's going to lead us into Josh's later comments, is player development. Josh wanted to give Adelman the opportunity to touch base with all the players on the team, but I think I got the impression that the ones he was most emphasizing here were the young guys, because there's going to be summer training, summer workouts, whatever that they're going to be doing and want to do with these players to help facilitate their player development. And Adelman's going to be, part of touching base with them on that. As this is a thing that I think all coaches on every team do every summer. But I've seen this idea a lot. So, real or fake, Will? DA will be better about player development. And if so, why do you think so?
I feel like I have to say fake because I don't have any reason to think he would be any better until I see it.
Uh,
So I have to just, I mean, again, like I feel like this season kind of taught us that the two timeline thing is definitely not the best plan. That being said, there are going to be young guys who are still going to be on the team, like Deron Holmes, and you have to develop them in some way. But
I mean, we still need Peyton Watson to like become a competent role player in the NBA.
yeah, J.K. Walrus says, I fear this might mean please Lord Pewatt and Strawther take a leap. And yeah, there is something to be said. I mean, will Adelman be more likely to give younger guys more minutes than Malone, who is maybe notoriously known for not doing that and having this idea that you need to do the right things and then you'll get minutes? And did he need to let go of that leash a little bit more? Maybe. I mean, he did give
Maybe
minutes.
DA will give them the opportunity to do all the right things this summer,
Yeah.
right? We heard a lot of stories about one of the reasons that Julian got as much quote unquote slack as he did throughout the season is that he was in the gym all summer with the coaching staff and he was doing all the things that they wanted him to do. Um, Perhaps more so than others. So they at least do like, okay, like he's trying to get this stuff. We know that he's focused on it. I do think that part of what is limiting some of these guys' player development, the young guys in particular, is that we just have too many of them. like one critique, like one like set of critiques, I should say, of Malone and Malone's rotations as it pertains to player development is that he's not playing enough of the young guys, but also like guys like Peyton Watson need to get longer stints. This is something that like Adelman has talked a lot about. And I'm like, that's not really congruent. That's not even how it works at like OKC, right? You're not going to get longer stints if there are more guys playing in the rotation. And like you get, and we actually like I think the Peyton example is instructive in a way, because I think the way that the roster is constructed actually disfavors his development in particular, because whether he's playing with Jokic or in the non-Jokic minutes, he's going to be playing significant minutes with Russell Westbrook, or at least was last year. I don't know what's going to happen going forward. We have plenty of off season to talk about that stuff. But like those guys like just could not be on the floor together and produce like significantly positive minutes, even with Jokic on the floor, because of I suppose it's just like this the spacing concerns. Peyton has his own like developmental limitations that make him a little less versatile. But when you put in a player with, like Russ, that has to have a certain configuration around him too, it makes it really difficult to facilitate like optimum situation for development of young volatile player that sort of occupies a similar, at least ideally a similar role to Russ in like the secondary ball handler kind of slasher playmaker guy that maybe can finish but doesn't always finish plays. So that's
Well,
like it's not just about the coaching. Like I'm really curious to see what they do with the roster. I'm curious what DA does with his coaching staff, what he does not just with the assistants that are going to be on the bench during games, but like player development and all of that. Okay. CT Fazio, the overlap discussion. Thank you for reminding me. Again, Peyton Watson is instructive. One of the things that Calvin Booth emphasized in summer 2023 when he made the draft picks of Pickett, Julian, and Hunter Tyson is that, look, we had enough defense. We need more offense. We're going to get these kind of offensive guys. And there were a couple of interesting defensive wings that Hunter Tyson went ahead of or like close to in that draft, because he was the last of those draft picks. Guys like Andre Jackson Jr., who I think went like a pick before him, but it was like, well, we could have picked him at Pickett's spot and just taken Pickett at the Hunter spot. That was like, and you know, he's been kind of on and off for the Bucks, but it's kind of similar role to Peyton Watson, right? Bigger playmaking defensive wing that can't really shoot, right? That's the thing. Tumani Kamara, who the Suns drafted at 52. I think a lot of people liked him on draft night. I'm actually surprised that he went that late. That was a really deep draft, I will say. I think he went after Trace Jackson Davis. There was a lot in the second round of that draft, as well as it obviously being a great first round draft because we had Wemby in there. You had that was Derek Lively's draft as well. Obviously, the both Thompson twins, like that was a really interesting draft year, right? We didn't draft any defensive wings. And the idea was, well, we can't have too much redundancy. Redundancy is the silent killer, according to Calvin Booth. And a couple of years removed from that draft now and those comments from Calvin, it seems more and more evident from like later roster moves, such as not retaining Justin Holiday, that the idea was less about, oh, we can't have too much redundancy on the roster because it's a silent killer, but we can't have somebody who's going to occupy the same role as Peyton Watson. Which, to be fair, you can lump into the redundancy as a silent killer, you know, description, because if you're Calvin Booth and you believe like we have to develop Peyton Watson because he's going to be like the best possible, you know, guy for us at this position fulfilling this role, obviously having guys that could play ahead of him would impede that. Now, Peyton Watson hasn't exactly become the player that we needed on any kind of consistent basis. He's had flashes that we've talked about on this show, right? Had a rough playoffs. Obviously had that, was it a knee injury, a knee sprain, like mid-season? That threw him off. We've talked about on this show, like, how Peyton always looks when he comes back from injury is like, very rough.
Yeah.
He probably has like the lowest post-injury floor on the team, which is crazy considering all the guys that we've had have injuries and come back and look terrible. But that makes sense. He's also the second youngest player on this team after Trey Alexander. Yeah, still. So like I get that, but because he hasn't been that guy and we don't have somebody else that could kind of fulfill that role, we were in a really tough spot when it comes to that. And I think it's funny because in 2023, I felt like they had a lot of good redundancy.
Yeah.
Like you had Christian and Bruce that did basically the same thing. Obviously, in that year, Bruce is better. He also did some ball handling and to be like that redundant role from Jamal. What do you think about this?
I think it's weird. I remember Malone saying things like, you don't want to have any like specialists, but then Calvin said stuff like, no, redundancy is a killer. And I remember talking on, I can't remember if it was an off-season show last year, but where I was talking about the Celtics, and I thought basketball was trending in this way where it is way more about redundancy. Like you want like a clone.
Pass, dribble, shoot, defend.
4 players all out there.
Do a little bit of everything, yeah.
And you have your
and
one
look at
star.
OKC. They're all the same players.
You have your one star who's like transcendent and does what he does, and then everyone else around them has to be like a clone of the same guy who can do a little bit of everything. And like the redundancy thing and the specialist thing, it sucks because then it's like you put Peyton Watson in maybe when you need some defense, but then you have limitations because he can't do anything else. So you're like putting in these very specific tools that just aren't overall working out. Yeah. And the redundancy thing I think is weird. Like we do need like some overlap because we're just running out of bodies. Like as soon as someone goes down, then you have no longer anyone to like replicate that when you don't have redundancy. And so like when AG goes down, who do you have? No one.
Yeah. Yeah. That like the power forward lack of redundancy. Like we spent in our off season Denver's roster show that we did where we talked to Matt Brooks from Nuggets Digital about the number of power forwards and centers on this roster that cannot play. And that like we talk a lot about backup center, but backup 4 is such a black hole for us on this team. Maybe even more so than backup center.
Until Duran, baby.
Well, maybe like Calvin was ahead of the curve on that, but obviously he gets that injury last summer, but relying on a rookie to fill that role is really tough. But again, Calvin maybe creates a situation where if Duran hadn't gotten injured, there's nobody that's playing ahead of him in that role because it's like nobody is better is going to be like a clearly better backup 4 in that situation. So it's a bit of like, man, we really went all in on this strategy and it's tough. So we're talking about player development as it pertains to Adelman. Before we continue on Josh Kroenke's comments, Will, if you could bring up Bruce Brown's Instagram post from yesterday.
He shared the news of Adelman's hiring on his Instagram. So closely monitoring the situation.
Yeah. A lot of people think Bruce is definitely going to be back next year. I'm not saying he won't. And I'm sure his agent is annoyed with him posting things like this and like him in the Avs hat.
He's also, like a Nuggets
I think that's
the
first picture on that story. Because it's like, this guy wants to be in Denver and he's kind of scaring off other teams. Denver's going to be rather limited in what they can offer him this summer. It's going to be just like last year where it's like a minimum or at best a taxpayer mid-level. And that's, I think what Russ decides to do is going to determine a lot of that. And I'm not sure that Bruce is going to want to come here for a minimum because I think he can get a taxpayer mid-level somewhere else.
We'll
And maybe
see.
even a full mid-level. Like he might still be worth that, which is like 12 million a year, right? So that's going to be an interesting one to monitor over the summer. Someone someone was saying there's no way he would tease Nuggets fans like this if he wasn't going to come back. And I'm like, guys, do you not remember June 2023?
Where that's all it was, yeah. But he got his money,
Yeah.
and I don't know. Like I've heard mixed things from all kinds of
Yeah,
Nuggets fans
but
about.
he also took the money.
Yeah, of course, as he
Like,
should have.
well, yeah, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have. I'm saying, oh, I've heard like he's already made his money. He'll be willing to
He'll
come
be
back for a
coming.
minimum. It's like, well, he also took the money last time. So like what makes you think he's gonna
But also,
forego that logic this time if we're not able to offer him,
there seems to be this
what other
sentiment
teams
that
can.
he's just like a scrub now, though. Like people are like he hasn't played in so long. I don't even know if he can play anymore. Like there are some people who don't even want him on the Nuggets. Um, I don't know.
Would you like for those people, like, would you like another playable player? Because we were lacking that
A
this
playable
year.
player
A
who
playable player
loves our team
who
and
misses playoff
teammates.
basketball, apparently. He also
Yeah.
posted that last week. We talked about all the good of David Adelman. Like, maybe player development will be better. Maybe it won't. We don't know. But we can be optimistic about that. Announcing right now gave him all this time to assemble his staff. He was impressive in the playoffs, all this good stuff, right? I like David Adelman. I'd like to make that very clear. I've liked him for a while now. I was surprised that he didn't get an offer last year, as many assistants were getting their opportunities. You know what's weird is we haven't, like, I'm sorry, I just have a digression in my head is like, is Willie Green staying with the Pelicans? I guess so, because they haven't announced anything different. Uh, the bad, real or fake? A new GM should have been empowered to go through their own coaching search. Will.
This is hard for me to say. On Twitter, I was definitely saying fake, the sentiment of fake, but because I'm like, you're a new GM. If you were like a seasoned GM who had like
Well, when I say
experience and
new
all that,
GM, I just mean whoever's coming in,
yeah, I
like
know.
new to Denver.
But
Okay.
let's say you were like a very experienced GM or something from the outside, and I would get where you're like, hey, I've been doing this. I have this reputation. Like, I should be able to hire the coach I want and put in like the vision that I want. It does feel a little bit limiting in some ways to come in and that position's already filled, and you kind of have to like just get on board with what's there. But at the same time, I was hoping that any new GM that would come in from the outside would have hired Adelman anyway because he's a good candidate. So there's a chance that could still happen. I guess so. My comment on it being like, whoever takes this job is going to have to not be this
A
megalomaniac type
megalomaniac.
guy.
Will
Which,
is reading my show notes. That's your words, by the
yeah,
way.
exactly. So
Yeah.
that's because that's kind of how I felt like that's how Calvin was doing it
Mm-hmm.
in a way where he was
Mm-hmm.
like, got the job from within. Malone was already there, won a championship, and he was already thinking like, I don't really like Malone. I want him out. I want to like redo this, redo
I'd like to
that.
just like provide a citation to this. This was what was written based on sourcing that I assume included Calvin Booth because of some of the details that was in there from the article, the Tony Jones article that came out in the days following the double firings, uh, the double
Hmm.
elimination, whatever. So continue.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying the GM in this case will have to come in and like buy in on some collaborative process from the get go
Right.
because of the nature of these hirings. Um, Even if they agree to it and they're like, yeah, I love it. I love Adelman, whatever. How long is that going to last? Is there going to be bitterness that's going to grow over time? I don't know. Or are they going to want to fire Adelman after one season? I don't know. Like Josh said his goal is to have a organization that's cohesive and unified, obviously, but he also cited how having disagreements is good and then you come together. And I
And
guess
present a public united front, at least.
yeah, and our up next one that covers this, but I think I put more on Malone and Booth specifically and how they handled it than like it's just an inherent thing that happens with GM and coaches, and their relationship dynamic. So while it would be nice for a GM to do that, you can't just have everything sometimes. Sometimes you just gotta, you're managing the assets, you're managing the roster, you're managing the draft and the scouts, you're leading them. You don't, you don't get to pick the coach this time. Like, sorry, you can't have all the
You
power
can't have
sometimes.
everything always. I mean, like, if you want the GM for the job and that's something that they want, like, that's the thing is, like, I think there's a actually, I'll jump ahead to a later point that I think agrees with you here. So I was listening to Altitude Sports Radio. Nate Lundy made this great point. Or no, I think he's on Mile High Sports. My bad. I was listening to a lot of Denver content yesterday, so don't be mad at me for messing up my citation. But it was Nate Lundy. He suggested that many external GMs might actually feel, similar to what you're talking about and kind of comply with that, where they're like, look, okay, I don't get to pick the coach, whatever. I get to build a team around Nikola Jokic, and Jokic gets the coach that he wants. Jokic did say he was the only player actually that was asked about Adelman post game in Game 7 that did not present a like resounding endorsement of them. He's like, that's above my pay grade. Josh Kroenke made a joke about that at the presser. That was like, well, you guys know how much he makes. I don't think that it's above his pay grade at all. So that was kind of silly, which is funny because Josh Kroenke is the one paying him. But I don't think that I don't think this job is unattractive because of Denver's difficult situation with respect to like assets or the cap. I don't think it's unattractive, even necessarily like in a specific instance where it's like, okay, you don't get to pick the head coach. But it represents like how much autonomy am I actually going to get to do what you're like hiring me to do in this job, right? Because look, whether you agree or not, we got the reports that Calvin Booth was looking at packages to try to trade Jamal last summer, vetoed by Josh. Calvin Booth was looking to trade Mike Porter Jr. midseason. Again, whether you agree or not, vetoed by Josh. Now, to be clear, like the summer stuff is a little bit different because it was like like they were trying to extend Calvin. That's the other thing I want people to remember here is like the Cronkies do not disagree with Calvin's vision for the team. They were trying to extend him last summer, even after everybody has their gripes about what they've done with the way that they've managed the roster and the cap sheet. And the Cronkies looked at that and was like, nope, that's fine. And he doesn't get fired until this like civil war sort of reaches a boiling point this season with the civil war with Malone. So the Jamal stuff was like pre that, but he got vetoed mid-season. And Josh was asked about this at his last presser. It was like, well, we're not going to make any big changes when there's not organizational alignment. At that point in the season, they pretty much know they're not going to be extending Calvin, right? They're going to let his contract expire. They only fired him when they did because they were fired Malone. Like, I think they were just like, let's just do this both at the same time. Like, it doesn't matter because they were going to let Calvin's contract expire anyway. Like, at that point when Calvin was looking for MPJ trades, like, you're not going to let a lame duck GM make that move. But it speaks to a pattern of, again, whether you agree or not with the actual moves, ownership coming in and making these decisions and not letting basketball ops operate the basketball decisions, at least with the level of autonomy that maybe an external GM that comes in and like, oh, you want my fresh perspective and you want me to like make changes here, I have to be allowed to actually make the changes. And I think hiring the head coach beforehand, not even letting me go through my search, like let me kind of buy into this guy and like be on board with this too in a situation like the Kings did with Scott Perry. Again, I'm not asking us to be the Sacramento Kings. I'd like to make that very clear. But there's that contrast there. And I think that is what would make a job like this most unattractive of all the, negative factors that we've talked about. Those other things can be overcome, but I don't think that a GM, a good one, wants to come in and not be able to do their job.
Yeah. I mean, I would say Josh became more hands-on and started vetoing things when he probably knew Calvin wasn't going to be the dude, which I liked. I think, yeah, it went on too long for sure, because we didn't really like what Calvin was doing, though. It kind of took this season to see how it played out to decide on his future. Um, but I liked the decision ultimately. And he was asked about how he sees his involvement changing even in this next year. And it wasn't really that clear of an answer, I think. But I still think the way
He's like, I
the,
kind of want to be more hands-on during the transition period. So, like, I
yeah,
guess right now this summer.
because you gotta let the GMs and the coaches do their thing. Like you can't just hover over them. Uh,
Right.
I don't know if they're hiring different roles, like president of basketball, and then there's the general manager and blah blah blah. And how does that break down? And how the responsibilities are delineated. But yeah, I mean, I still think he'll give him some autonomy, but also like with the coaching. And I'm not like a
But
front
it's
office
like
person.
to what degree, right? And
Yeah,
what does something like hiring the head coach, who knows how far ahead of time of hiring the
it's
GM?
just
It's different than like let's look at the Hawks. I think are a good counter example here because they fired their GM. They didn't fire GM and coach. They have Quinn Snyder. I think they like Quinn Snyder. I don't know why. Like people really love Quinn Snyder for some reason. The Jazz, I think, helped that because they were really good regular season teams. The Hawks have not been that, but they like Quinn Snyder. He's there. It's funny because Calvin Booth is also interviewing for that job there, so he would come in and presumably be just kind of that guy. So there's a little bit of a difference there where, like you said, like when Calvin was promoted and Malone was already here. But there was an opening. Like there was an opportunity there for a GM to be able to come in and like pick that head coach. And you kind of take that opportunity away from them as a like from the potential new GM as opposed to a situation like Calvin was coming into where Malone was already here and like I think that would be a little bit more megalomaniacal if like okay the guy's been here 10 years they win lots of games and they like you have to figure out a way to collaborate with this guy because he's too like ingrained in the organization as opposed to oh, there's an opening. Great. And then, no, opening's not there for me to be able to put my stamp on that part of the organization. I think that's like taking that away is a little like that dynamic's a little bit different.
yeah. And this could be just me trying to be more positive about it, but I think the fact that it's a necessity that they come in already being ready to collaborate, and the fact that what kind of took us down were the coach and the GM being super toxic. It's hard for me to imagine any other new hirings being as toxic as that. Um, but yeah, they're
Well,
forced to you can't just come in saying you're going to put your stamp on anything because it's not really about you. It's about like Jokic and doing what's best for the team. So you got to like
right.
sacrifice a little
But
bit.
all these guys have ridiculous egos.
Yeah,
Like
and
that's how you get to this. That's how you get to this
so
position in
they
a
could
way,
lie and be
right?
like, "Yeah, I'm cool with it," but secretly inside they're going to still act like these power hungry GM type people, but we don't need someone like that. Like I didn't like how
Yeah.
Calvin Booth operated. That seems kind of how he
And it seemed
operated
like
to
it
me.
wasn't
So
just like GM coach, like that was a like front office thing too. Like it wasn't like as collaborative
yeah,
necessarily and there were factions even within just the front office side. I do think though I want to cut Calvin a little bit of slack because I do reference that situation of him coming in and being promoted when Malone was here and he wanted Malone gone. Again, according to the Tony Jones piece that I assume Calvin was one of the sources for because of the detailing in there. Um, but also there was a lot of sort of rumors around that like Calvin has wanted Malone gone for a while. So that's not the only, place that I've read it. But I want to cut him a little bit of slack here because I don't think it's crazy for a new GM to want to come in and make significant changes.
no,
Now, to be fair, in the situation that Calvin was in, it was like, well, Tim Conley left, and we just kind of need someone to fill this space and like continue to manage things. He did actually remake the roster in some pretty significant ways that I think a lot of people praised him for at the time, including drafting Christian Brown, drafting Peyton Watson, signing Bruce, which apparently Malone was like a big part of, because coaches are important in like recruiting players to your organization. It's not just players and agents as well. Um, and just kind of bringing a little bit more defensive versatility to the roster, and then immediately pivoted away from that. Um, but I don't think it's crazy to have wanted to do that. But I do think it's kind of crazy for ownership to promote the guy that wanted their head coach gone if they wanted to keep the head coach. Like, that's the
Well,
part.
did they know that? I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? But you'd think that that's something that you talk about. It's like, well, he's our head coach. Like, what do you want to happen? Are we going to be able to make this work? It seems like the Cronkies were a little bit too rose-colored about the way that that relationship was going to work, because it sounds like Malone and Booth haven't gotten along since it predates his promotion to GM,
Well,
right?
that could be, yeah.
And you talked about Josh Kroenke, maybe they hire both a GM and a president of basketball ops, or maybe Ben Tenzer ends up being one or the other. And then you have like the president of basketball operations that can kind of oversee things when Josh is gone. That's something that he has talked about being sort of wary of ever since his last presser, where he's like, man, I like wasn't here enough. There wasn't someone to be that like mediator between these two guys. I want to point to something that is going to be the same here, because they're hiring the head coach and it's not the GM that hires him. But it's relevant to the dynamic between Malone and Booth too. When you have these two guys, GM, head coach, that where the GM isn't the head coach's boss because they didn't hire them. I don't Even when they hire him, it's not always like I'm your boss, like the owner's your boss. But there's a dynamic there of like, this is the guy that brought me in, whatever. But when Malone sort of thinks to himself, like, you're not my boss, like, I don't have to listen to you, he's not wrong, right? Calvin is not the guy that brought him in. Malone doesn't owe him anything. I was thinking about this after, I don't know if you watched The Last of Us.
I know the story of it, but I don't watch the show.
Oh, okay. There's this scene where Ellie and Joel are fighting, and he's like, this is my house, my rules, kind of thing, that like teenage scene. And she's like, you don't own this house, they gave it to us.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, that's actually what made me think of this, is like Malone thinking you're not my boss and him not actually being wrong about that. I think that sort of not creates the dynamic, right? Because like people should be able to just kind of figure out how to get along with each other, even if one is not have like direct, like explicit sort of responsibility or leadership over the other one. But it helped to foster like some pretty like nasty stuff between the two, because there was nobody besides Josh that could kind of come in and be like, all right, I'm the mediator, like I'm in charge, like I kind of get final say to like settle, like be the parent basically, and be like, all right, what's going on, you two? Kind of thing. And that is maybe the direction that Josh wants to go, looking at it positively. Maybe Tenzer becomes GM, Ben Tenzer, who we're going to talk about a little bit. And then they hire a president of basketball ops, or maybe they promote Ben to president of basketball ops. He's like, you're going to be the mediator between Adelman and whoever becomes GM should any like weird conflicts like arise. And that's just going to be how it is. And that kind of thing. I don't know if that's particularly attractive to external GMs either. So you're going to have another boss, and I don't get to pick my head coach. I don't know. But you could look at it positively as well, is what I'm saying, is like we're changing the structure of this so that this sort of two heads of the snake has some kind of oversight to it so that they don't eat each other.
I just like, maybe I'm too trusting of the Cronkies right now. I know it's like it's fun to hate on them. They've had plenty of reasons to hate on them if you followed the team for a long time, and it's fun to shit on owners. And to your point, when we were talking about it on Twitter, like just starting out from the perspective that billionaires aren't necessarily the smartest people, things could go bad. I am maybe giving Josh the benefit of the doubt and saying I think they're going to be able to like hire a GM that's going to be able to come in and work with Adelman, and it'll be somewhat civil and okay. But
Yeah.
obviously, that's just hoping. I won't know until I see who it is and the moves they make and a couple seasons under the belt, and if the toxicity's still going. And so we'll see.
There were many fans that were happy/relieved about the firings because they thought that it signaled the Cronkies, they hear you, they're listening. There's going to be significant changes. We are not going to waste Nikola Jokic's prime, right? I feel like even more so now after this last press conference that there's a little bit of patting themselves on the back over this. We have this comment from Sean PG10. If you could bring up the first one. I think we need to remember that the vision for this team is Kroenke's vision. Booth was hired to implement it. Any new GM will need to do the same. That's right. Like Josh Kroenke fashions himself a basketball mind, whether he's right or not. And he did play basketball. I'm not saying he doesn't know ball. Don't come at me, people. Okay. But clearly he's very involved in some of the biggest decisions in the franchise. And part of the problem last year is that he is involved in those decisions, but isn't involved enough day to day. So maybe that's why he feels like he might need a second set of eyes and ears. But the reason I feel like they're kind of patting themselves on the back for this most recent change that led to the team making a run that nobody thought they were going to make, except Will, who actually picked Nuggets in 7, and they came close, but not quite. They did try to extend Calvin last summer, right? They were on board with what he was doing. It was just because of how he went about it that they weren't happy. And maybe it wasn't even that. Maybe it was just the contract negotiations. They're like, we don't want to pay you that much. It's fine. And that's kind of how it sounds like things were going, because they didn't extend him preseason. And then it was like, oh, this isn't going to happen. We're just going to let your contract expire. And then the Malone stuff happened. And then they were just like, let's just get rid of both these guys. I don't even know if the Civil War factored into Booth's firing as much as Malone's, to be honest, based
Yeah,
on
based on
everything I'm
him
hearing.
saying he thought we'd be out in the play-in.
Yeah. So Josh re-articulated in this press conference the plan that it's about the young guys. A lot of our answers are going to be internal, was the quote, right? Agnello Piro from Mile High Hoops on Denver Sports Radio, he interpreted Josh's mention of this is actually an important one, quote, look into ways to improve there with respect to the draft. And he talked about other things too, free agency, whatever. But he's like, we don't have a pick in the draft, but we're looking into ways to improve there as well as free agency, whatever. That was interesting to me. I really want to credit Agnello for that analysis, because I'm thinking back to 2023. What was the situation they were in? They would have been in luxury tax with JaMychal Green's salary. They used a salary dump of JaMychal Green to pair it with a future first, and they got like some seconds and the first round pick that became Peyton Watson. Is that something that they're going to try to do this summer, to salary dump maybe Zeke and Dario, trade a future first for a current first, trade into this draft, and like, okay, we get a salary dump, but we'll also get like a meh pick and be in this draft? How would you feel about that?
If it meant salary dumping Zeke and Dario, I
You
don't
want
care
to
what
trade
it
a
gets.
future first round pick to salary dump Zeke Najee to get under the luxury tax?
It depends on how far out it is, because it's like,
Well, the picks that we have are far out because we have so much tied up in from the AG trade and the Stepien rule.
yeah. Hey, you got to maximize Jokic, so time to improve the roster immediately.
Okay, but is that improving the roster? It's like it was driven by. It's like, okay, it's interesting going back to this Peyton Watson thing, because it's not just Calvin, right? There's a lot here that you put on ownership, because it was driven Like Calvin was like, I've got a great way for you guys to get under the luxury tax. And he gets to make his draft pick out of it.
Yeah.
At that point, right? It's very convenient, I would say. And I do think that part of the calculus for not extending Calvin, and they pretty much decided like that he wasn't going to stay at the deadline, both him and Malone, but then they made the firings later. That was my read on Josh's last presser. But I've talked about this, I think, on this show, and I've talked about it a lot on Twitter. I think the main thing that they were annoyed about with this season, roster-wise, was the fact that Zeke and Dario's contracts put them over the luxury tax, which means they're in the repeater, which means they've been in the luxury tax for a couple years now, so they're paying even more in luxury tax dollars on the roster. Unless they manage these salary dumps before the start of the new league year in July. So that to me, the reason I mentioned it in this section is that it feels like the same old Kroenkes doing the same old things, whether they get something good out of it or not. Like maybe they end up trading into this draft and they get into the lottery and they get like a good player. Again, it's going to be a rookie. Who knows how useful they're going to be this season. Right. And it would help to free up some roster spots if they were able to dump both Zeke and Dario. Right. Like I'm imagining like Brooklyn has like 4 picks in this draft. None of them are like fantastic. So maybe we try to sell. They have a lot of cap space. And the and the picks to trade to be like, oh, that's fine. We're not going to pick 4 young players in this draft. You guys can have one of these, and then we'll take that future first round pick for, the years when Jokic is going to be in decline. And then kind of whatever from there.
There's an argument to be made about it, but I don't know how people feel.
How do you feel?
It depends. Like if you're doing it just to like save the owner's money, I don't really like it, and that will be debated depending on what we end up getting.
Well, we're getting this pick, and we're gonna get a good young player out of it. That's what they did with Peyton Watson.
I don't think we need to trade the first just to get a pick in this draft to get a new young player for this season. No, but
it's the salary dump. It's the combination of, okay, you're gonna salary dump these guys that are contracts that you can't move for some reason, maybe because you shouldn't have given them out in the first place. And we'll facilitate that for you, and we'll throw in a pick. It's the combination of those things.
Yeah, so it's like just maybe to me, I feel like getting off Zeke and Dario is so like important, and that excites me even in it of itself that I might do
a little too much. Like I think that the value of a future pick is perhaps being understated, not because you're going to use that pick. Even like, oh no, like we have to save those future picks for when the team is bad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like turning it into another young player that is another gamble, especially if it's someone like at the back of the first round again, compared to like maybe you could take a gamble on a higher upside, maybe even lower floor player, depending on who you would take in this draft. But I don't know that, like, I was listening to this yesterday. I'm like, I have to talk about this because that would be major in terms of signaling the like hard commitment to this plan of youth development and staying under the luxury tax. Like it's the 2-pronged, those are the pillars of the Kroenke plan here, right? It's not the Booth plan, it's the Kroenke plan.
Yeah. But could you fill one of those salary dumps with a veteran player of some kind?
Yeah. And then you open up a roster spot.
And so there's something.
There are ways that you can sell yourself on this plan. Is the thing. Yeah. Like that's what makes it so alluring, right? But again, like you already talked about, like you think that the things wrong with this organization, at least in terms of the interpersonal stuff, are fixed because Booth and Malone are gone. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, they're the ones that were feuding the most, and they're the ones that had the most power on how the team was operating on the day to day. And if it's true that Malone wasn't playing certain guys in practice or was intentionally not playing dudes to spite Booth, and Booth was not trading for players at the deadline, blah, 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 because he wanted Pickett to play and Piwat to play and whatever, then that's a huge issue. And I don't foresee that would be the case, because now whoever's coming in, the GM and Adelman, don't have personal stakes in Piwat or anyone specifically, because they didn't draft them. So it's now should be, I think like their feud was definitely unique, and like coming off a championship where Malone's like, I was the championship coach, and Booth's like, I was the championship GM. That's going to create a very unique like power struggle that now these this Adelman and the new GM are not going to have. And while Adelman was on the team for the championship, he wasn't the head coach. So they have like things to prove about the organization, and they should be aligned on maximizing Jokic if we're to believe like some of what Josh is saying, whether these specific comments are like putting into question some of that idea. I just feel like it's a risk for sure, and it could happen again, but I just feel like it's generally probably going to be fine. I don't see the organization going into that toxic of a level again.
Yeah, I do think that the toxicity stuff is probably particular to them, although it's not like they were the only ones that contributed to it. Part of the problem is that they never talked to each other. So it was like intermediaries and people being scared to talk to each other also. So it's kind of like, well, let's see. Maybe everybody's just breathing a breath of fresh air now. But in terms of how the organization operates, as kind of illustrated by this hypothetical plan that Agnello, pointed out, the way that the organization operates is probably not going to change. It's interesting that Josh, in his sort of, in my opinion, soft pitch of Ben Tenzer during this press conference, was like, Ben's been doing an unbelievable, that was the word, unbelievable job in reorganizing things for us over the last 6 weeks. I'm like, what has the GM been? Look, I don't know what a GM does behind the scenes in terms of the, in the time between the end of the regular season and, when the season ends, probably some pre-draft stuff, maybe organizing the trades that could trade us into this draft and also result in some salary dumps.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's talk about the GM stuff to kind of close this stream, because we're not going to have time to talk about the other playoff series. We may have to do another stream next week. Josh kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth there. Just I think that's the consensus on his words here. He was kind of like, I hear Jokic's words loud and clear when he was asked about Jokic's comments after Game 7 about the need for depth. It's like the teams that are competing still are deep, and he talks about OKC. He talks about the Pacers. But, quote, our roster was put together under different rules. Then he references some of the restrictions with respect to the tax aprons. I want to read this excerpt from Jeff Morton's piece from the Denver Stiffs. It was not based on Josh's press conference. This was from a few days ago, but I thought he hit the nail on the head with the way that Josh and kind of ownership generally, it's not just him, it's like most ownership groups that aren't Matt Ishbia are going about this. Quote, what has been absent in all the discussion about the Nuggets' future is how ownership intends to maintain the winning besides riding Jokic like a circus elephant until his legs fall off. That's not feeling the pressure. He's worried about whether Josh is feeling any pressure. The nature of the new CBA is restrictive, but you would believe that the Kroenkes were aware of these restrictions, considering they own the team and presumably sit on the board of governors meetings. Jeff didn't even go this far, but the point is the board of governors and the owners all voted to ratify this new CBA, right? And I have talked a lot since, especially last season. I wasn't sure about this take in summer of 2023 when the CBA was first ratified. But the point of it is to insulate ownership from critiques about being cheap, because there are these additional restrictions on spending too much money that affect roster building. That's what the point of this was. on the ownership side. Like, that is what they voted for. So I kind of don't want to hear about it. Like, you put these restrictions on yourself, so you have to operate within them. And I thought that Swipa, when he did his joint show, what are they calling it? Boom and Gloom over on Lockdown Nuggets yesterday, did a great job of kind of just giving them a piece of his mind about the things that were still in their control that they did get wrong. And I'm saying they because it wasn't just Calvin. He's not the only one involved in making these decisions. And look, in no uncertain terms, Josh is talking about this team as if none of the core four is getting traded. Whether you agree or not, I think you have to be pretty careful about the kind of deal that you do for that. So the roster is going to be what it is at the top. And they're operating under constraints under that. Financial constraints, apron constraints, whatever. And so he talks about development. So
yeah, like, can I just ask you,
yeah,
like,
go ahead.
do you think it is going to be a huge mistake for the Nuggets to have this focus on internal development? And would you rather, I know you said if you're going to make a trade, it probably should be for more of a clear upgrade. And we know that that's really difficult. So where are you like landing on this now? Because I kind of agreed with what Swipa was saying, that it would probably be a mistake to try to focus on development too much. On some level, I feel like change is almost necessary because, like, I mean, whether it's just Dario, if it's like a buyout situation or something, I feel like some, at least, or DJ not coming back, at least something is going to change. But is it going to be like a significant enough change that like we were actually talking about? And I do think it'd kind of be a mistake to just like keep things relatively the same.
I think we're going to end up keeping things relatively the same and hoping and praying that Peyton Watson and Julian Strother become better. And Christian
Okay.
Brown, for that matter, right?
Yeah.
That's the bet. It's those guys. It's that Duran works out. It's that he looks okay after a catastrophic injury a year ago.
Like
That's the
there
bet that they're
is,
making, and they're like quintupling down on this bet right now on
there's
all of
a,
these guys. Go ahead.
there's a world where that works out, but do you think it's a good plan?
Sure. I think that like it's fine to want to focus on internal development, but sometimes young guys just don't work out too. What you're asking for is for basically 80th percentile outcomes within a short period of time too. Sometimes it just takes like a good player takes a long time to become a good player, regardless of what their potential is when they're young. But you're asking for 80th percentile outcomes on these at least first round draft picks. And obviously, like we're talking about like what's the backup point guard situation going to be like with like Jalen Pickett and all of that too. Who's a second round pick? Hunter Tyson, who's a second round pick. You're asking for 80th percentile outcomes times, was that 6 now? Guys on rookie scale contracts between Peyton, Julian, Christian, Hunter, Pickett, and well, Zeke's not on a rookie scale contract anymore, and he might be gone this summer, but I'm skeptical of it. Just because of what you have to give up. So yeah, it's tough. To do that over and over and over again. And Swipa made this point. Like, if you want to triple, quadruple, quintuple, sextuple down on young players are what we're doing, draft higher in the lottery. Get guys that have,
Yeah.
like, I want to be clear, getting a lottery pick doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a good role player. Like, there's a lot of busts, especially because in the lottery you're usually drafting for upside, not so much in the last year's draft as we talked about, because it's a lot more like, oh, these are like solid guys that are probably going to be good role players in the league, right? But they still have to like acclimate to the NBA. Some of them have to learn how to play basketball. I think Peyton Watson is probably the most extreme of all the guys we talked about in terms of like where he's going to be in terms of his development, because his skill set is so raw, but he also has the most upside of all those guys. Meanwhile, Hunter Tyson, of questionable sort of athletic floor, relative to what you'd want from someone that can play NBA minutes. Julian Strother, defense hit or miss. Who knows? He looks like he could probably play sometimes in the regular season, early in the season, at least, right? Now we were able to hide him in a couple playoff games, but
Yeah.
that's
I
not
mean,
something you count on right now.
I was like, is he saying internal development because it's like some of the answers are internal? Like,
It
or is it just
sounds like
all of
that's
it?
what that's the other thing is, like, you could clear out the very back of this roster and try to put more vets there, but probably you're not gonna want those vets playing over these young guys if you're prioritizing internal development. So
Yeah.
what kind of vets are you gonna sign?
But I'd be like, Duran is an internal answer that I think we could look to, but he's not played yet. And he's someone that
And coming off an Achilles injury.
yeah, but he's someone that we tried to get up higher to get. Like we had to trade away maybe too much to get him, but that's at least trying to get a higher pick that
Sure.
could be more impactful. And he's an internal answer, but I don't want to only be doing that. Like I do think we need to
Right.
bring in new people, at least for my sanity, because I'm sick of watching this same team. As much as I love watching the Nuggets and Jokic, like I'm tired of seeing them struggle. I want to see more like ease of play, fun play. So I can only hope.
Yeah. Thing is, like, good players are expensive, so I get it on
Yeah.
one hand. On the other hand, I'm like, ugh, why did you guys vote for this CBA?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so that you could be insulated from these criticisms. Well, guess what? I'm not gonna stop.
Yeah. No, no.
We sort of referenced Ben Tenzer as maybe the likeliest candidate for next GM. Ryan Blackburn talked about this on Locked On Nuggets, how he actually heard that both Adelman and Tenzer were going to be announced, but then only DA was
Yeah, that's
announced.
really interesting.
I feel like Josh is waiting for the heat to die down on that report that Tenzer was a I forget the exact wording, but it was basically like he's likely to be considered for the job, but it was very, kind of glowing, like he's probably got the inside track there too. And then he's going to announce them maybe even in the next few days. Who knows? Um
Because that's what I was thinking. I was like,
yeah.
if he was likely to get the job, as people were assuming after they heard the Adelman hire, why wouldn't have they just done it at the same time? And that almost made me feel like Tenzer was less likely to get it. But
Yeah.
I get why people were saying this now confirms that Tenzer's going to get it because otherwise, why would a GM come in? They don't get to hire the coach.
Exactly.
But
So I had this whole discussion about like new GM doesn't get to hire. It's like, well, they're probably going to go with the guy who's already fine with it because he's been there.
and
Again, this is probably in contrast to when they promoted Calvin, who probably won in Malone gun. And yeah, so this is that's just where we're at with this.
I did see some people joking though, saying Jokic is the
Yeah,
GM anyway, so what does it matter?
that's above my pay grade. He would say. Maybe not. Well, he makes more. He makes more than the GM and the coach combined, so
Mm-hmm.
probably not. I talked about how Josh said he had an unbelievable job. Okay, yeah. Oh, credit to DMAC from Altitude Radio. He's the one that talked about maybe Josh is going to hire a president of basketball ops, and that's where they're going to make the big change to kind of be like the culture guy, but then Tenzer is going to be GM.
But I
I
feel
don't know.
like Josh is the president of basketball ops, like
But he's not always
effectively.
here, so he's kind
Yeah.
of like wanting somebody to be him when he's not here,
Okay.
basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah,
That's fine.
yeah. Sounds like a cushy gig. Just mediate some disputes. Be like, good idea, boys. Whatever.
Whatever he needs to do to get the organization on a positive path that's prioritizing Jokic, I'm down. It's just, yeah, there's a lot of comments like we talked about throughout the show where it's like he says it, but then he says something else that seems to fly in the face of what you would think we would be doing for Jokic and what
Oh,
Jokic is
Will,
saying.
he hears you.
We
He
hear you.
sees your
I don't
concern.
know if people seen Succession. We here for you.
Kendall. Yeah. Um,
But yeah, I mean, I don't
yeah.
really know much about Ben Tenzer other than what people are saying. Like Matt Moore saying he's done a pretty good job. Interviewed him, liked what he heard from him. He's been involved with the
He was the GM
Gold.
of the Grand Rapids Gold.
Yeah, so I mean,
He was involved in getting the G League team started up. I went back and watched an old interview that he did on DNVR. It was a dual interview with him and Tommy, so he didn't actually get to speak that much. But kind of here, he's got a background in law. He does a lot of the contract stuff for the players uh, and not for the players, but on the organization side of doing contracts with the players. He seems like he's talking about being a jack of all trades. So he's just he's been with working in the front office ever since he was an intern at like 20 years old. So he does a little bit of everything and has done a little bit of everything. So he knows the organization in and out. I am wary. I have been let's look at this comment from Big Honey. Big Honey, nice to see you. I like the Adelman hire, but I hope we get a GM who can actually navigate the aprons and get some solid trades and signings. I like this comment because I've been somewhat critical online, maybe too critical of Ben Tenzer in particular online because the way that he's been described to us by Josh is that this guy's our cap expert. Went back and watched this interview from a couple years ago where he's talking about like I'm the guy who's like always on the line with the league to like clarify specific things about the new CBA and get specific examples and things like that. And I'm kind of like, well, we've made a lot of mistakes anyway. So it's like
yeah.
I'm not blaming you, but also you didn't
Like,
necessarily keep us from
was
making
he
those
warning
mistakes.
Calvin? He
So
was like, whatever, I don't
I don't know.
care. But
That's true
no,
too. We
I
don't
kind
know.
of doubt that. But
We don't. I don't know. We don't know. We don't know the internal workings here. All we can judge is what's been put in front of us.
and we
What's in
haven't.
front of us is that I don't know what makes this guy an exceptional hire.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
either. But I do think it
yeah,
is important to say, like, everything Big Honey brought up, and you brought it up to me on Twitter as well, is like the asset management, the drafting. There's just so much that goes into it. It's not just about like, can you pull off a trade, even though that would be amazing too. You got to like have
right.
relationships and negotiate these things.
Yep,
It's a
exactly.
huge, huge job, and I think it is more important than hiring the coach at this point. I mean, both are very, very
Well,
important.
now it is because we already hired the
Yeah,
coach.
but I do think the hiring the GM is harder to find. Like, if you ask a fan, like, okay, if we fire Booth, who are you going to hire? Like, almost no fan can name a single name because it's like, what GM can we even get other than ones that are already on other teams that we like and would love to like get them somehow. But coaches, they're like out there, like who's out
Yeah,
there. You can name some
yeah.
names. GM's like, who the hell are we even gonna get? And I was like, should I be concerned with the fact that Josh was like, I'll be given a list, like,
I'm
you know.
gonna go to I'm gonna go to an outside firm and maybe they'll give me a list of up and coming executives.
Yeah, like I
Josh
don't.
seems really. It's not a critique. It's just an observation. And it's also not a surprising thing because I think a lot of these like young rich guys who are involved in building something with an organization, in this case, a basketball team, as Josh is, uh, they really appreciate someone who is quote unquote impressive. And that I think that was the word out of that he used to describe the kinds of guys he's going to be soliciting from these outside firms. He's also going to look through his network. He's talked about his Rolodex, and he's going to talk to people that he's got connections with in basketball. I also think that he just said all of this to be like, no, it's going to be a super extensive search, guys, I promise. And then it's going to
Right.
be Ben Tenzer.
I've
Like,
got all the
no, yeah,
names in the world we could get from like, secret firms, but it's
yeah.
Ben
And it's going
Tenzer.
to be Ben Tenzer, which isn't necessarily bad, but it does signal that they're going to continue business as usual. And I think that this organization needs,
Yeah.
if not an overhaul, some significant changes in how they do business
Hmm.
to make the vision more coherent. And we will talk about this more on further off-season shows because I could talk about contracts endlessly.
Yes, we'll have plenty of time.
But
But
we
for
are now at the
now,
2 hour mark.
I
So,
do.
but
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
just to like conclude, like I think we probably need a mix of internal consistency and more change and new vision. Because I don't like the idea of just bringing everything back, as we saw. Like I think the depth was a huge issue, and I want the team to have more options and the team to be healthier going to the playoffs. So I'm a little bit concerned about what Josh was saying, hoping for the best, hoping. I don't know if it's they're just saying we're gonna bring
Also,
it.
Josh,
They're
hoping
gonna
for the best.
they're gonna bring him back just to maybe make a move next trade deadline, kind of a thing. who knows? But right now, I think I wish I heard a little bit more about
This
how
organization
serious
doesn't
he
make big
was.
moves at the trade deadline.
Nah.
That's not Aaron Gordon
Aaron Gordon,
is
yeah,
the
I
only
was gonna
one.
say, which is the reason we don't have a draft pick in this draft, at least right now, or first round pick. So, but that seems worth it to me at this point.
Yeah, it is definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you for the sickos that are still in the chat. Before you leave, please remember to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button so you can keep up with our content. Hopefully, you appreciate this really extensive and esoteric discussion about the general direction of the Nuggets moving forward. We're going to have so many off-season shows, guys. It's not even funny. I promise we will continue to talk about actual basketball in the playoffs. The Pacers are doing some crazy things. The Wolves are not doing many things. The Thunder might just be unbeatable, but we will talk about actual basketball on future shows. So look out for us. We'll probably be back next week. Just got to figure out this live stream schedule thing. But these have been fun so far, and we really appreciate you guys. So, yeah, follow us on socials. All our links are in the description. And yeah, always remember that winning is fun and losing sucks.